It wasn't a technical change, right? This was a massive adaptive change. But if we go down the path of where we understand that, a learner can be as great as they want to be, as amazing as they want to be, if they use this technology in an appropriate way, exercising their critical thinking, exercising their writing skills, and their reading skills, then I think they'll have more agency as a human being than it could ever be imagined. They could have a really profound conversation with an agent of some kind, right? That expanded their thinking about a topic in a way that the teacher wouldn't be able to do. I think that was really the selling point.
Welcome to the AI in IB Schools podcast, Strategic Leadership Conversations for the Tech Revolution. I'm Rachel Bodley, and alongside my co-host, Rita Bateson, who is a former IB curriculum manager and a founding head of an IB Continuum school in Dublin. We're excited to have you join us as we chat with school leaders from around the IB world, uncovering their best practices, innovative approaches, and real-life stories of AI integration. Welcome again to the AI in IB Schools podcast. In this episode, I am joined by Kevin Crouch, who is the head of EdTech and IT at the Western Academy of Beijing. He is going to share with us today his school's path to really adapting and thriving with AI, where they started and where they are now, and as well as how their school is navigating cautious optimism when it comes to AI and encouraging the use of AI to really foster student agency. So let's go ahead and dive in. Kevin, great to have you here. I would love to start by just introducing yourself and tell us a little bit more about you and the role that you're in right now at WAB.
It's great to be here, Rachel, and I'm really looking forward to this podcast. I think there's quite a story to be told here. And I've been at WAB now for 5 years, and I've been doing this job for 10, and also an educator in some capacity for another 12, right? So I've been doing this a while. And when I think back to when I first started teaching, I think one of the things that I wished for more than anything else was that my kids would have access to just what we have now, that they would have access to essentially an all-knowing, sentient type technology that can answer any questions and give them, access to all the world's knowledge.
Yeah.
And now it's like that kind of a careful what you wish for type thing, because, there are a lot of implications of that, as we're seeing. And when this first landed right in the middle of WAB's, last COVID gasps in 2023, I didn't know what to make of it, right? Because I felt like, wow, this is unbelievable that this is here. But I felt like at the same time that everything was going to change. And here we are 2.5 years later, and really not everything has changed, but we've had to completely shift gears in a lot of what we do. So sorry if I'm talking too much here, just jump in.
No, that's great. I think what I would love to first sort of unpack is your role and how it sits structurally within the greater SLT team as well, just to give everyone a little bit of context about WAB and how it's organized. I know we've had this conversation before, and for all the listeners today, Kevin and I know each other pretty well. So if we throw in some jokes here or there, you'll know where they come from.
Yeah. So as a member of the senior leadership team, and for all intents and purposes, a tech director, but with an eye on learning, and with an eye on the technology experience of everybody in our community, really, because it is such an important factor, and it can have very strong impact on culture, productivity, right, and longevity of people in an organization. So I report directly to the head of school. Stephen Taylor is a very close colleague of mine, and I work very closely with the principals to help them ensure that any technology, we're getting the most out of the technologies in their sections, as well as with the communications team. So, I don't do this in a bubble. I have a very strong team, including, tech integrators at every section. including some well-known people out there, Carrie Lee Beasley, Jay Scher, Doug Taylor, so and others.
Yeah, can you speak a little bit more about that? Because we did have a call with you and Stephen together. And I love that you said, I'm not doing this all. Of course you're not. But really, I see some schools as well saying, no one on the senior leadership team wants to hold the hot potato. Do you feel like you're holding the hot potato, or do you feel like you and Stephen Taylor together, Stephen is the director of teaching and learning at WAB, do you feel like the two of you hold the hot potato, or do you really feel like it has been an incredible collaboration of a larger group of people?
Yeah, no, I don't think anybody's holding the potato. I think we are all definitely feel like we're in this together. And part of the way that has happened is that being on the SLT, being in those meetings, I started very early on really introducing tools and tips and tricks, and making sure that every one of our leadership team members had access to a tool that they paid for or could get reimbursed, whatever. And that we went through every week and we looked at something different, right? And so from the top down, it was very interesting to see how when a principal started using the technology, that experience made it abundantly clear that things were going to be different in their sections and they had to act, right? Mm-hmm. And so in order to act, they started bringing me in, Stephen in, et cetera. And we've worked very closely together with the principals and the tech integrators to ensure that our teachers, have at least have a voice in this, and that they can, that they're learning and growing, and that they're not being left behind.
Yeah, and so you mentioned early experimentation and making sure that everyone was experimenting in some way, shape, or form. Do you think that's helped? And then also this camaraderie of this coming together and all of you working on it, how has that really been helpful too in impacting the school-wide strategy towards AI?
Yeah. So I think it's kind of it's twofold. Number one, I feel like just the insane productivity, benefit that this offers for people. And then by using the tools, the necessity of understanding about transparency, mm-hmm. right? And talking about how we're using the technology, so that when somebody brings a new product to the table and says, look what I created, they'll say, look, I put this into ChatGPT and started with a frame and then I added the stuff and now I need your input, right? This isn't like, we're not like, oh my gosh, this person sat, in a dark room for an hour typing this, 400, page thing out, right? Mm-hmm. Or whatever it is. So really practicing that process, understanding the implications of increased, productivity and having this tool in your hands, that was really powerful. And secondly, just understanding the implications of having, a thought partner there with you continually, and how much more clarity that we can gain as a leadership team on the many issues that we struggle with week in and week out by using this technology. And so when we do that, then it's only natural for a principal to make this a priority in their sections for all teachers to understand the capabilities there. And I think that trickle down approach is very powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that ability to use the tool, be transparent with one another about the tool, understand mm-hmm. the implications of it, and then be able to model it better for your teachers, who then can model it better for students. Can you also speak to just AI as a priority at WAB? I'm sure it has been one of the probably handful of priorities.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I don't think, in the grand scheme of things globally, I don't think we were, first movers or super early adopters. And part of that was where we are on the planet. In China, it was quite difficult early on mm-hmm. to get accounts for our teachers. We didn't have tools that we could use reliably. You had to have a VPN. You had to have a foreign phone number to access ChatGPT. So a lot of schools here were, kind of a little bit behind, but that actually gave us a little bit of time to fully understand the technology and the implications on learning. And we were able to early on start building guidelines before the tools were unleashed, into the wild. So we had a pretty robust set of guidelines and a philosophy behind it, which was, we would call this sort of, you mentioned it earlier, this notion of cautious optimism, that there is tremendous potential here, but with tremendous potential and power comes great responsibility. So there are some things we have to understand and know before we just start using this. And things like data privacy, right? And just not getting your kids, not asking your 12 or 13-year-old kids to go out and, expect them to use an AI tool for some project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And I think it's helpful also to understand. So obviously you came together as a group, you've come up with this philosophy, you've come up with these guidelines. What happens next? So talk us a little bit through that journey too. That's really, and I think schools love hearing about that.
Yeah, I think, when it was very clear early on that this wasn't just a technical shift, it wasn't a technical change, right? This was a massive adaptive change that we were going to experience as a society, right? Also as a school. And so that means that, there's just a number of different things that you have to do in order to ensure that everybody's able to be successful with this. And so, you're starting with your voluntary small group trainings, your early adopters, right? Coming in and then sharing ideas and bouncing ideas off of integrators and off of me and people like that. And like talking about with our leadership. But then when that's happening, you're building a kind of a coalition of the willing, of the teachers that are going to be your champions, and that you can look to. You say, hey, could you try this out in your class and see how that works? And so we got a really strong cohort of that. We started I started essentially we call it the alt team, so it's advancing learning with technology, but it was
I love that, the alt team.
Voluntary task force that looked into this, and part of their job was to develop practices that could be shared and decide on the efficacy of tools. What tools would we want to adopt? So there was some voice from teachers in that. Then there was, once we had we had guidelines, and we had to get down to some more brass tacks with some rules, like who are we going to let use this technology, and who are we going to say this isn't appropriate for you, right? Especially age-wise. And then you have large group training, and then at some point, we had to bring everybody in the room and make sure everybody got the same message. And it's not top down that way. So, it wasn't didactic, right? So a lot of these experiences, especially early on, were conversations where we had to hold a space of ambiguity and uncertainty in the room. And we had to let teachers share their fears, their negative experiences, whatever it might be, and not react, right? And just let everybody hear that. And then let everybody hear the positive statements and the hopeful statements, and just get that all out there. And we did that multiple times. And, especially in the high school, that's where a lot of the concern, lies around this. So those are really important things. And then, okay, are we all on the same page? What are we actually doing with the technology? So we developed our own set of learner competencies and a kind of easy to memorize framework that we could repeat to kids and teachers. Carrie Lee came up with the 3 headers. I think Jay may have also contributed to that, but transparency, accuracy, and learning. And under those headings, then we can break it down into the competencies that we want to be able to, probably, I don't know if we'll ever assess them with kids, but we want to make sure that we're having those conversations somewhere in the curriculum with kids.
And these relate directly then back into your philosophy.
Exactly. And in fact, we took our philosophy and our commitments, and we
Yeah.
also, those are for teachers, and we plugged those in under the same headings:
Yep.
transparency, accuracy, learning.
Maybe if you're open to it, Kevin, we could maybe share in the show notes some of the work that you've done. I don't know if you've made it public. Yeah, because it would be really helpful, I think, for other schools to see. So you've let everyone, you've had this sort of come to Jesus meetings.
Yeah.
And then what? What comes next? Who is then thinking about, are we on the same page? Who's helping you write those guidelines? What did that look like?
Well, I mean, you can talk and talk and talk, but I think what is the data? Like how do you know if you've been successful, right? And I think, when we started seeing teachers coming to us, especially in February, when all the internal assessments and things start coming due, and they start to say, look, I can't handle this. I know these kids are just using, AI for this. They're just spitting it out, right?
Yeah.
And there's no way to know. And so, we could tell, like, how many teachers were saying that that's an issue, and how many teachers were saying, well, of course I know all along whether these students have been doing the work themselves or not. Like, so some teachers knew because they had process built in, and other teachers didn't. So that's when we knew that we had to say, look, that old paradigm where you hand a writing assignment and they go home and they write it and they come back, that is over, right?
Yeah.
That cannot happen anymore. So that's the come to Jesus, right? And that happened. But luckily it wasn't as many teachers as we kind of feared that it might be. Because really when that ties in now with authentic assessment, right? And I know some of these IB assessments can be hard to do that with, but when we all know what authentic assessment is. It's hard to describe it, but you know it when you see it, and it's it's the project-based learning, right? It's the the debates and the videos, and it's the face-to-face interactions you have with kids where that it's them doing the thinking in front of you, right? And a lot of those things, if you can't do that and you just have a writing assessment, then you definitely have to have a pathway, a roadmap of process built for kids.
Yeah.
And that's what we've really been working on for the last year.
Can you share a little bit about what that looked like? So those guidelines and that process or framework, you've called it all three, but what is that kind of looking like?
So I don't have that right in front of me right here, right now, but the last time I saw that, the conversation was around, number one, when a teacher assigns something, that they have to indicate how AI can be used in that process, right? Because there's a whole process behind this. It's not just writing the document. There's research, and there's brainstorming, and there's checking accuracy and everything, right? So where can AI be used and where can it not?
Yeah.
That has to be clearly indicated on the assignment itself.
Yeah.
And then the expectation is that kids indicate where they have used AI and where they haven't. And the teacher needs to see all the, they need to see the whole set of breadcrumbs along the way leading up to whatever type of assignment it is.
Yeah.
And this isn't new to most of our kids. Most kids in the IB take some type of class that has this type of process portfolio, right, where they have to document what they do. So it really isn't, that much of a stretch. It's just they're not used to maybe doing it in geography or whatever it might be.
Yeah, or in math.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. For all us math nerds out there.
Yeah.
Don't forget about us.
Yeah, no doubt.
No, that's very interesting. And so is that where you feel like you are right now? Like, where is the staff? Where is the school right now? Are you in a space of practicing, trialing, figuring out, do you feel like the guidelines and the framework are in a really good spot right now? Are you still working on them? And then maybe start speaking of what's next.
Yeah, we're still working on that right now, and I think the person that tends to lead that work is Jay, who runs our extended essay, and she was an early adopter, and she was getting kids in the extended essay onto AI, a year and a half ago, or more, and with tools like Elicit, and just recognizing the tremendous power that it has for inquiry.
Yeah.
And so she's really kind of trialing a lot of this stuff. So yeah, I don't have that right in front of me right now, but I think that, knowing that you've got this paper that could pretty easily be written in its entirety with one AI bot, right? And then you say it's okay for you to use AI, but just know that these are clear guardrails for you, and that you go beyond these and you're putting yourself at high risk, of academic integrity issues, let's call it that.
Yeah.
Then most kids, like I would say the vast majority of kids, they want to do well. They just need to know what those guardrails are. They don't.
Don't we
they're
all?
not,
Yeah. It's the same thing that's always worked. It's the same thing that works with my young children.
Right.
Show me the guidelines, show me the rules, and that intrinsic motivation, it usually will rule. If there's the rapport in the classroom already, and the student, you're right, students want to do well. I wanted to speak to, because a lot of work that Rita and I are doing now is we're trying to think ahead. We're trying to help schools kind of think, okay, 2 years from now or 3 years from now, and we're really talking about professional development with staff, true. Professional learning. And then also, what do we have to teach our students in terms of an AI curriculum? And I know you and I have spoken about this a little bit, but what is that going to look like at WAB specifically? Or have you had conversations about that? What does that potentially need to look like? Or or you could even refer to other schools, what steps should they maybe take next?
Yeah, I think that was our key priority for this year, was actually answering the question, what do our teachers and our students need to know about AI and need to know how to do with AI? Like, what are the competencies? And, there was some very broad ones created by UNESCO, I think about a year ago, and we kind of tapped into those, but they weren't good enough for our context. So we wrote our own, and we used AI to help us with that. We didn't just come up with them, but very clearly aligned with our context as an IB school in China, K to 12, and fully international clientele, right? So that was key, and we tied them into this transparency, accuracy, and learning. So we're really thinking about, when we think about what those competencies are, you're thinking about the what and the how. So what is AI? How is it built? What does it do? What does it mean to have all this information in there, for you as a learner, but also what are the ethics around using all that, tapping into that power? So there's a whole ethics piece, and I know you do that, right, with your curriculum. I think that's really great how that's kind of front and center in what you do at Eblana. And then we're looking at accuracy, right? So how do we know that what's spit out there for us is not a hallucination? And it's getting better all the time, but it's still fraught with with errors. And so this ties in with critical thinking and agency. And I think this is one of those things that I struggle with a lot, is seeing students that just verbatim take whatever comes, don't even take the time to look at anything that was spit out there, and just paste it in there as if they wrote it themselves and turn it. It still happens, right? It still happens. And I feel that saddens me a lot when I see that, because I feel like in some ways that there's, what we're seeing is almost kind of almost like a resignation, right? That, well, what's the point? It's, this information is now so commoditized. Who cares what I think and what I write? There's this information out there. If that's what you're asking for, here it is. And I think a lot of educators have felt that, for decades now. but it's becoming more and more profound.
Yeah. Well, and to be fair to the students, like I've now worked with a lot of adults. Adults are doing this too. Like
Right.
it's not just the kids. Adults are also just copying, pasting, and just spreading AI slop around the world. And
Exactly.
so it's so it's not just our students, and it really reminds me of what we're trying to do in our curriculum as well. And maybe this is something you've probably thought about within your competencies at WAB, but what does it first mean to be human? And what do we value about being human? And how can we become incredible learners? And what does it mean to become a great learner? What are those competencies that are important for us to be able to evaluate AI and use AI as a tool?
Well, right. And I think that ties in with the last, main heading, and that's learning, which I feel is really closely aligned with agency. So learner agency. And so, that is something that WAB has stood for, for several decades now. And,
Yeah.
that is what our entire mission is built on. And a lot of other schools are too. Not every school that listens to this podcast would have the same context as WAB, but really here we bend over backwards to ensure that that if a student needs some change to their learning environment or the learning outcomes, the learning expectations, that we can accommodate for that.
Yeah.
Whether it's time, whether it's content, whether it's output, whatever it is. And so, and there's learning that happens in on both sides whenever that happens. So I think one of the biggest risks here is that suddenly our learners start to feel like they don't have the agency that they may have had in previous years. And I don't think that that's a predetermined outcome, but the reason why I say this is because if we go down a path, which I don't think we are, but some schools might be, if we go down the path of saying that because these tools are too powerful, that we need to have to pull back some of the freedoms that we give our learners and the agency that we give our learners and go to more one-size-fits-all type assessments, then I feel like there's a net loss there. But if we go down the path of where we understand that, a learner can be as great as they want to be, as amazing as they want to be, if they use this technology in an appropriate way, exercising their critical thinking, exercising their writing skills, and their reading skills, then I think they'll have more agency as a human being than that could ever be imagined.
Yeah.
Which is, I think this is that precipice that we're on. So we're taking that very seriously, right?
What do you think that WAB is going to do or going to try to do to make sure we don't have to remove that learner agency or remove any tools from students? What do we have to set up? What are the guidelines that we have to put into place?
Yeah. So Stephen and a task force have gone through and completely rewritten the assessment policy, right? Just in the last year.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the core documents. They're not even really mentioning AI, but let's just look at these. Would these hold up, now to the technologies that exist? And, the answer was at the time when we looked at them, no, right? But now they do. And I can't go into those in depth right now, but
no, that's okay.
Things like having a process portfolio as essential pieces of kit for learners, whether they like it or not, right? Is key moving forward. Just really digging into this notion of what a competency is, like what is the expression of that knowledge and ability, and what might that look like in different learners and different contexts, and how can that be authentically expressed? That's huge, and that will set us up also for our work with the new metrics, which I'm not like super qualified to talk about.
That's okay.
But that's a different podcast. But in the end, essentially what that is that we're going to be looking at assessing learning in very different ways, not just, what can you write down and what can you repeat, right?
Yeah.
But what can you do with that?
It's very exciting. And for anyone listening, Kevin's referring to the Melbourne metrics. If you haven't looked at their
Right.
work, it's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredible. It's very exciting. So yes, save that for another time for sure.
Yeah.
I guess I have one other question for you, unless you want to share any, and I'll let you share whatever else you want to end with. But I guess my question would be, is how are you going to sort out those slow moving educators and even potentially colleagues and leaders? How do you make sure that they're on board, they're also experimenting, and they're also embedding all of these new practices? Because I think that's something that, change is hard. Change is difficult. Of course, you have your early adopters, but you also have your slow movers. How do we deal with those? How do we get them to come along on this journey with us?
Well, I think this is a really tricky one, because I think, the question you're asking in some ways is, to what extent does this need to be obligatory in our school, and with all teachers, with all kids? And we don't have a great answer to that yet. We know that it has to be all kids at least some of the time, maybe not in all subjects, and most definitely not all of the subjects all of the time. And I think that we've always felt like if we set the essential conditions, if we set the stage for experimentation, safe innovation with AI, that the natural flow of things, right, the innovators and the early adopters and the late adopters and everybody else, it'll just follow the path of almost all other technologies, that eventually things will just be built into everything you do. It won't be a question of whether I'm using technology or not, or AI or not. It's there, right? And your kids will be using it, and it'll just be part of what you do. It won't be considered something different and new. And so I don't feel like there's a hurry either with this. I think the technology is going to change so fast, in the coming years, that when we think we've prepared a kid for it, we haven't, right?
They'll go out and learn the next version before we do.
Exactly.
Yeah, they'll already be using it before we even know about it. Yeah.
Right. And so, I think, so on the one hand, I feel like, there's as much of an imperative to protect what's human and valuable about being a human and a learner, and as much as there is learning about how to use the technology and the potential there, right? So I think it's both things. And I think when you look at technology or innovation adoption, doesn't have to be technology, right? But innovation adoption, I think when it really starts to pick up is when you have members of your community who are seen as maybe slightly late adopters and also influential. When those people do something cool and start talking about it, and they don't mind us sharing their successes, then suddenly it becomes okay for everybody else to kind of start, oh, maybe I should try that, right? And I think we've had some successes with that recently. People that early on were just like, this has no place in my classroom, who are now
presenting about the latest tech tool and how they're using it, which is awesome.
They're like, so they're also very capable educators, so they knew how to leverage the tool in a very effective way once they took their time, and they just thought about this for a while. But what was really powerful was when they started to see that you could personalize a learning experience for each kid in a class in a way that was never possible just as one teacher in that classroom, and that they could have a really profound conversation with an agent of some kind, right? That expanded their thinking about a topic in a way that the teacher wouldn't be able to do. I think that was really the selling point.
Yeah, Yeah, that's amazing. And I think that is definitely something to celebrate at WAB, that's happening, right? Because I think a
Yeah.
lot of schools will listen to this and go, how can we get there? How can we, and there's something to be said too about, there's a lot of power in that, in those, those late adopters. I think they're careful. It reminds me of my daughter, who's an introvert. They're careful, they're thinking, they're listening, and they're waiting. And then when the time is right. And I agree, it's just a matter of time before this is the new normal. But for me, I guess in the work too that I'm doing with Rita is really, I do think there are some things that could potentially be obligatory. And that's really the literacy piece, the ethics piece, making sure everybody understands that. And Rita just wrote a course around AI and safeguarding. And there's a lot of stuff happening in the world. I'm sure you've already faced some instances. We won't go into that because it's a very difficult topic even to discuss. It's a lot of very horrific things happening in the world.
Yeah.
I wonder how that's going to shape, in schools. And I wonder how we make sure that all of us are on the same page moving forward in order to protect what we care about most and protect our kids, and
yeah, I think we have a plan for getting into, consistently getting into grade 9, especially grade 10, grade 11 next year, key moments for those types of ethics and literacy type conversations with kids so that they know what they're using and what the implications are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any comments on, maybe I don't know if you've had time to look into the Chinese AI curriculum, or any comments on this launch in the fall of 2025? What are you thinking about it? Because it's not just China, right? I mean, the UAE is also after this. The United States is now making statements about literacy. What are your kind of thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think, those are those kind of policies that are designed to ensure, relevance of a country and their population in the future. I certainly, I applaud that. I think that, maybe the selection of age groups and what they need to know at certain young ages might be a little bit, a little bit extreme. However, I think that I think it might be an example of a technology that if you get too far behind, you might not be able to catch up, right? And depending on how this goes, I don't think anybody really knows where this is going to go. But also, it's not just that; it's what people are doing with the technology now. When they get so far ahead, when they completely outperform. And collectively, people begin to outperform others who are not using the technology. I think that's when a gap is formed, and I definitely think these countries are trying to avoid that kind of a gap. And I respect that. I haven't seen the details of the curriculum yet, but
yeah, very interesting. I think there's like some 100 scenarios they're going to push out first in China, and I'm curious to see if it's relevant or worthy for WAB to even pick up, that'll be a fun journey to follow you on.
Yeah. Right.
Kevin, is there any last words do you want to share with the listeners today? Maybe some words of wisdom or words of advice or next steps that you've got from your role and your experience in the last couple years with AI?
Well, I would say, I think one of the things, kind of a metaphor that I use frequently is that this technology is a little bit like the impact of the car on our brains, right? So we no longer have to walk where we need to go, and so that's definitely had impacts on our fitness, right? But we can go farther and we can go faster. And so now we're experiencing a similar situation where we don't have to do the hard thinking. We can take the car version of thinking and just get there fast.
Mm-hmm.
And yet so much good happens when you walk, right?
Yes.
So
it's true. Absolutely.
I'm not getting rid of my car either. So I think we have to maintain the motivation to do the hard thinking while using this technology as the most powerful thought partner that's ever existed, right? And it's at your fingertips all the time. And that's what I'd leave the audience with.
I love that. Maintain the motivation to do the hard thinking. That's so good. That's great. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks so much for being on the show with us, Kevin. And we will definitely be in touch. And if anyone wants to read in the show notes a little bit more about what WAB's doing, we'll probably put your philosophy and maybe your guidelines, even if you're open to sharing them, in the show notes so you can check those out. And with that, I'll say bye for now.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
You've just listened to the AI in IB Schools podcast, hosted by Ablana Learning. At Ablana Learning, we help your school stay ahead of rapid technological change, cutting through that AI clutter with ethical, sustainable guidance rooted in international school values. Founded by veteran IB educators, we've designed the world's first fully articulated K-12 continuum AI curriculum, ready to run as either a standalone program or threaded into existing subjects. And we offer access to practical professional development, delivered in person, virtually, or self-paced, that upskills every member of your staff. Ablana is here to ensure your school becomes AI-informed, AI-safe, and AI-empowered, enabling your students to think critically, act responsibly, and innovate with purpose. Let's talk about your school. Send us an email at info@ablanalearning.com. We'll see you next time.